Welcome everybody to the Inside Pass. This is the third episode of our in-house rugby podcast that we are doing at News 24 for you. My name is Lloyd Bernard. I'm the sports editor at News 24, and I'm joined by a very special guest who's popped down one floor from the 16th to the 15th, Stephen Null, one of the most respected rugby minds, rugby journalists that the country and certainly Cape Town has been lucky enough to have over the last few decades. Steve's been doing this for 31 plus years, Steve, is what we could come together on last count. Welcome to the Inside Pass. Thank you so much for making the time and joining us.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. I really appreciate it, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
All the truth, Steve. No, look, this weekend, obviously we've been busy discussing Rugby Championship, and there is a break this weekend with teams travelling. South Africa obviously in New Zealand now, preparing for back-to-back test matches against the All Blacks in really a fortnight that will go a long way to deciding who the champions will be as the Boks look to defend their crown. It's given us an opportunity, of course, to kind of take stock, and we've already started building up to next weekend in Eden Park, where the Boks will look to break that All Black record that has existed for 50 straight test matches. They haven't lost there. I mean, really just a fortress, and South Africa setting out to try and do the unthinkable and knock over the All Blacks at their fortress. Steve, we counted, have been to New Zealand, we reckon about 8 times on tour. 1998, 1999, 2001, 03, 04, 2008, 2011. I mean, you've seen it all. You've seen the ups, you've seen the downs of Bok rugby in New Zealand. I mean, as someone who's done this for so long, I mean, how incredibly special is that? 30 plus years in the industry, and you've seen South Africa playing, against their biggest foes. And what was that like? I mean, you must have seen so many different things over there.
Yeah, it was really amazing, Lloyd. One of the sad things for me was when South Africans, a few years ago, New Zealand required us to have visas to go in, because the first words I got when I walked into New Zealand was welcome, not welcome. They absolutely love South Africans going in there. I recall 98, 99, I had this incredible swing from the glory of 98, us winning there in New Zealand in the 50th game between the Springboks and the All Blacks, Peter Rousseau's try under the posts, and then to 1999, a year later, we lost by a record score against the All Blacks. And it's just interesting how when the Springboks are in All Blacks or as a team, how the team dynamic and any issues in the team really affect the outcome. I know that will always be the case, but it's quite a dramatic swing, as you can imagine, against New Zealand. Also, luck played a bit of a role. I think in 98, I recall there were just basically the Boks didn't have any issues with injuries. When I was there, I think McNeil Hendricks dislocated his shoulder, early in the trip, and that was it, I think perhaps if you look back to 98, I think there was these were the days before TV referees or television match officials. I think New Zealand scored a legit try in that game that might have made a difference.
Yeah.
We were a bit lucky in Durban. James Dalton's try didn't count. But anyway, so you need that luck factor. And then in 99, we had issues creeping into the team, the Nick Mallett, Gary Teichmann issue, and some issues in the team, injuries and so on.
Yeah.
So those things come very clearly, and I think also, if I remember the Harry Viljoen era, for example, I think that there's also what it showed me is that there's got to be great clarity about your game plan. I think Harry took us in sort of an Australian direction. So I think you've got to, in my view, if you don't have clarity and you don't have focus, in my experience, but the experience in New Zealand is tremendous.
Do you think it's because everything's, because the stakes are so high that everything's amplified that much? I mean, you say that, if there's little cracks developing in a Bok team, they'll amplify on a tour to New Zealand. Do you think that's because the stakes are so high all the time that it just means so much to both sets of players and certainly to the Springboks whenever they're there?
Yeah, definitely the stakes are high. And then you've got to deal with that intense atmosphere. And I'm not just talking about at the game. I'd remember the 1999 game at Carisbrook, that was the so-called blackout test. And, everywhere you looked, you couldn't go to a shop in Carisbrook, in Dunedin, without there being a black sort of thing in the windows, And I think the players have to mentally prepare themselves because it matters so much to New Zealanders, So, and the stakes are incredibly high because I think New Zealand and South Africa possibly think of sort of, an unofficial world championship when they play,
Yeah. No, certainly one of sport's great rivalries, never mind rugby's. But, from what we've seen over the years, and this is something that I think we've all experienced along the way somewhere, whether it's in New Zealand or here, but there remains this great respect between the players, between the fans, between the coaches. I mean, historically, there's always been that kind of huge competition and rivalry, but at the same time, this massive kind of underlining respect that I think has also been a hallmark of this rivalry. I mean, is that something you also pick up when you're on the streets over there and, going from town to town? I mean, is it true that New Zealanders, love their rugby just as much and are as passionate just as much as South Africans? I mean, is that something that's shared between the two sets of supporters?
Very much so. New Zealand, interestingly for me, from the first time I got there, their sort of love for rugby transcended gender barriers. I think you would find the women talking about it with the same passion as the men. But I think between the teams, there's always the sense that you're playing against someone that can beat you.
Yeah, regardless of what shape the oppo is in.
Absolutely.
You could find the Boks at their worst. But on that day, there's every opportunity that because they need to, they're gonna stand up and do something. It's the same with the All Blacks. I mean, they've always got that in the back of their minds, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. These players are, both sides exceptionally talented. There's this... very unusual sort of stimulus of the rivalry. And I remember once I spoke to a person there, and the Boks were quite down. It was in an era where they weren't doing particularly well. And she told me, you just never know with them. The All Blacks were kind of overwhelming favourites, but with the Springboks, you just never know. We saw these dramatic swings. I mean, remember... I think in 2017, I think the All Blacks won 57-0, I think, in Albany. And then it came back and South Africa still lost at Newlands, but it was 25-24,
Yeah.
So you just got these...
I think that was Alistair's last last one here before the tour. Yeah.
But it makes no sense if you think about it.
Not within 7 days,
Yeah. And I think in 2006, locally we took... if I remember correctly, 52 points at Loftus, and then we beat them in Rustenburg a week later. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to our Johannesburg studios now, where we're going to be joined by Sim Abaniso, who's been covering the derby as well just this week, building up to it. Even though it's not this week, it is of course next weekend at Eden Park. And we're going to talk a little bit to Sim about what's happening next year. Sim, are you with us? Can you hear us loud and clear?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. How's it going, Stevie?
Good, and you, Sim. Nice story on Quesada and the Stormers.
Spoken like a true Cape Town reporter.
Yeah, Italy, shaping the Stormers' attack next year might have some Cape Townians a little bit concerned, but that's a story for another day.
Especially after they did so well in PE.
Listen, we wanted to talk ahead to 26, because we're talking about the rivalry, and it finds itself in another chapter in 2026. The rugby bosses from both nations have come together and said, listen, why don't we maximize this thing and kind of commercialize it to its full potential? And we're going to have an 8-match tour with New Zealand coming to South Africa in 2026, playing against all 4 URC franchises, a South African A team, we understand, and then 3 test matches as well. Unlike anything we've seen before, following the kind of blueprint of a British Lions tour, just your thoughts on that, Sim. I mean, is that something that's good for the game? We know the rivalry works. We know South Africans love it. I mean, you can't really find too many, red flags or problems with what they're setting out to do.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you begrudge them of the fact that they've decided to do that, then maybe you wouldn't be such a sports fan after all. So essentially, rugby has a terrible history of not making money. And better yet, the rugby unions have a history of not making money for themselves. It's just this black hole where money goes, to almost be burnt. And so you've got the two biggest rugby nations deciding to basically almost test their popularity in the game. It's almost like Brazil and, for want of a better description, and Germany deciding to play against each other to maximize on the commercial side of that. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, because rugby has reached that stage where, we've seen with things like equity deals, yes, some people have struck them, but actually it hasn't turned itself into a windfall. And, in the South African example, we just didn't get it over the line for various reasons, or red flags you talk about. And then over and above that, I think it's high time that the unions sort of try to find a way to make the money. So this is a great idea. And where I probably would kind of caution a little is, the All Black Springbok rivalry is a special one, and as a result, what you probably don't want to do is play too many of those games to the point of people getting sort of used to them too much. But I see what they've tried to do is obviously the All Blacks will be coming to South Africa in 26, and then the Springboks would be going to New Zealand in 2030. So they've tried to kind of separate it and make sure that it's not something they try to sort of maximize on a weekly basis, because, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Yeah. So, I mean, if there was an issue, it would be that, but, you can't criticize two sort of rugby unions deciding, we should actually make money for ourselves, because the game needs it, and badly.
Yeah. We were looking now. I mean, this tour coming up, the one that Kaniso Chwaku is on for News 24, and Kobus Klaasen will be going for Netvac. It's the first time since 2010 that there have been back-to-back Bok tests in New Zealand, in the sense of consecutive weekends. Because in 2023, last time the Boks were there, it was the shortened Rugby Championship because of it being a World Cup year. The same in 2019, and then obviously 2022 was the COVID Rugby Championship, where that tournament was hosted in Australia. It's also the Boks looking to beat New Zealand for the fifth time in a row, which hasn't happened in the professional era. And Sim, I'm just wondering, do you think that kind of stuff matters? Rassie said before Australia that, it would have been the first time they'd beaten Australia 5 times in a row. Now, there's a bit riding on this, obviously the Rugby Championship aside, but I mean, to beat New Zealand 5 times in a row would be quite an achievement.
It would be incredible, especially in New Zealand, because one of the things, somebody asked me what my thoughts were over the back-to-back tests that you've mentioned, and I kind of glibly went, we win in Auckland, break the records, all great, and then they're so mortified by losing to us at home that they win the next one, kind of like keeping the theme of the Rugby Championship so far, which is you win one, you lose one. And then I went and had a look at the numbers. Just since readmission, we've literally still only won 4 matches there, and the fifth result is a draw. So that was I heard Stevie talk about Wellington in '98. Obviously, the Ricky January test in 2008, France Staines long penalties in 2009 to win the Tri-Nations then, or the last Tri-Nations that we won, and then obviously the miracle of Wellington under Rassie, the 36-34. Yeah. So that's literally still the only games we've won there. So to kind of go there with expectations, let alone expectations to win at a place where nobody else has cracked the code is actually quite ambitious. So I mean, to then add sort of a fifth successive time over and above that is just goes to further. It almost makes you look deluded. But the little bit I've seen of this All Black side, forget Argentina, because I think we all knew Argentina is a good team from last season already.
Yeah.
But, almost on the strength of what they did against the French sort of second, third string side, you get the impression that it is doable. But then again, by the same token, the Boks haven't looked that flash at the beginning of the Rugby Championship either. So you kind of like almost left in no man's land. But to actually put it together, it would be insane for the Boks to win 5 times in a row, because we just don't know. We just don't have that kind of relationship with the All Blacks, simply because, they've been not only such a huge rival, but they've actually been the dominant rival of the two of us. I mean, I think the entire history between the two nations is played 108. We've won 42. They've won 62, and they've been 4 draws, and the average score is 21-17 to them. So it's kind of like, yes, it's a rivalry. It's almost like a Rafa Nadal, Roger Federer thing.
Yeah. Steve, from your side, I mean, we know that on the day anything can happen, especially when these two sides meet. Neither side is probably at their best at the moment, if you look on recent Rugby Championship form. And then you've obviously got the cloud of this Eden Park record hanging over this entire first fixture. Just looking at it with everything in context, I mean, South Africa still with a chance? I mean, do you think it's possible that they go there and make history, or do you enter this having them as, pretty distant underdogs, certainly for the first game of the tour?
I think they've got a very realistic chance. One looks at the All Blacks now and, against Argentina, and I was actually amazed at how the All Blacks were outplayed in their last game by Argentina. They struggled to get the ball. They fluffed some of their kickoffs. They got Argentina even went out, kind of beat them with their backs, know. So it's very interesting. And it also got me thinking a little bit about our game plan, and the Boks have been taking some heat for playing expansively. And there's been this argument that the Boks should go to traditional, their traditional game, forward power. But I found Argentina had a good mix of that. I think if the Boks go too conservative, it might be a mistake. But, having said that, I think if the Boks get the mix right, and I think they have a very realistic chance. I mean, I think man for man, I think they're a superior team.
Of course, and I mean, we mustn't forget it's been one loss, that one Ellis Park loss that kind of started, putting the seeds of doubt in everyone's mind. That's Stephen Null, Netwerk 24 Rugby Scribe. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. We appreciate that. We're going to go back to Sim now, because we've got the very, very important matter of the rugby that is taking place this weekend to discuss. It is, of course, South Africa in their second match of the 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup. They play against Italy. That game is at 4:30 on Sunday in New York. The Boks obviously winning their first game of the tournament, downing Brazil 66-6, and Italy going down to France. I think it was 24-0. Sim, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But this really is, South Africa's big game. You beat Italy, you make the quarterfinals for the first time ever. I mean, it's not a stretch to say that this is the biggest game in the history of Springbok women's rugby.
It most definitely is, and I must admit, I'm actually looking forward to it, especially when, sort of recent results make it seem like it's a realistic hope. I'm not going to say expectation. I think last year when we played them in that WXV competition that World Rugby organized for the women's teams, I think they were leading 17-7 at halftime, and then the Springbok women sort of almost caught them up with the final score of 23-19. So, I mean, you hope that they've obviously improved since then. This is the Springbok women, which I think everyone would say they have. But the question becomes, I watched a fair bit of the Brazil game, even though it ended up, that the dam wall ended up breaking, and then, they went 66-6 up in victory. early on, when sort of the Brazilians were still fresh and still passionate, I thought we were a bit impatient and just not composed in terms of how to try and sort of get over the line. And obviously against Italy is a team that plays in the Six Nations. They've been around for a while. They're ranked higher than the Springbok women. I think they're 8th and we 12th. And you kind of hope that there'll be a bit more composure. But what they do have is, which is ironic for a Swiss De Bruin team, is that their forwards are incredible. They got a great scrum, they got a good line out, and they do boss the collisions.
Yeah.
Just ask anyone who's tried to tackle Asezahele or Apiwe. I forget what Apiwe Ngwevwe at inside centre. So I think there's a lot to work with there, but they do obviously need to make sure that it all flies in formation, and if it does fly in formation on the day, history is there to be made.
Yeah, it obviously the history of women's rugby, globally and certainly in South Africa, means that there are struggles for TV time and exposure and corporate investment, and it's taken a while certainly to get to where it is now. It makes tournaments like this hugely important for the growth of the women's game. And we were chatting a couple of weeks ago, I remember, it's got feelings of the Proteas 10 years ago for me, the Proteas women's cricket side, where you've probably got a country that's certainly supportive, certainly interested, but maybe doesn't know as many of the players, doesn't know their backstories, doesn't know their skill sets. And then on a stage like a World Cup, like the Proteas did in 2016 when they made the semi-finals of the Cricket World Cup, you start getting to know your Laura Wolfarts a bit better. You start realizing that Shabnim Ismail's the fastest bowler in the world, because these ladies had that platform to kind of perform on the highest stage. It feels a bit like that now. Would you agree with that? I mean, getting to a quarterfinal for the first time on a stage like this with a coach like Swys de Bruin, who comes in with pedigree and experience, and with players, as you say, who are showing kind of international level ability and skill. It feels like we're on the cusp of something where if the Boks get over this hurdle and into a playoff, South Africa starts pretty quickly paying more attention.
Most definitely. You talk about our players becoming slightly more and more recognizable. I remember sort of reading up about the tournament just before it started, and the BBC had a list of the top 15 players to look out for in each position, and Asezahele was already there at number 8, which kind of means the rest of the free world, if we're not paying attention to it, is actually paying attention to our own team.
Yeah.
And should they get over the line here, you hope that we can then use it properly as a means for growing the game properly. Look, there are sort of things afoot already in the background. If you look at the girls have their own Craven Week now. The teams have their own women's teams, although not all of them are professional like the Bulls do.
Yeah,
like the Bulls are. You probably in a situation where you're sitting and you're hoping that the rest of the teams are going to have their own professional setup. And then I see that a lot of the sponsors that do support SA Rugby, a portion of whatever support they do goes to the women's team as well, obviously in addition to the under-20s and the Blitzboks. But it's not just a situation where people are just looking to align themselves with the box and not the rest of the teams. So with those kind of sort of incremental sort of aids, like sort of support, it's just going to get to where it needs to get to. But like you say, it needs almost like a moment everyone can point to as the moment where it all began. And if Sunday and winning that match, if they win that match on Sunday, that would be that moment.
Of course, in the build-up to the tournament, Sim, there was the huge result over New Zealand. I mean, just help our listeners understand that in context. The Black Ferns send a team over here, and South Africa, just before the World Cup, knocks them over. Just contextualize what that is. I mean, the history of New Zealand women's rugby and where they are in the pecking order, and then South Africa doing what they did.
Well, in New Zealand, women's team is, they are the record sort of winning team. If the Boks, put it this way, if the Boks have won, by winning 4 World Cups, are the team which has won the World Cup the most. The New Zealand women are at 6, if I'm not mistaken, and with having won the last one, I think in 2022 because of that COVID delay in 21. Look, before we go too far on that Black Ferns, on that Black Ferns win, it was the Black Ferns 15. And you know that every time anyone decides to put that XV at the end, there's a hint that it's not your first team. So it wasn't their first team. It was probably, kind of like a mixture of their second and third team. But you know what? Swace's thing was that when he was asked about it, he said he actually saw the main Black Ferns team play against this, the Black Ferns 15. And he says it was only in the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes that, it was a tight game until, the main Black Ferns team sort of pulled away with 2 tries. So what he was saying was, if there is a difference, yes, but it's probably not as much as we like to make it out to be. But, either way, it doesn't matter. The whole point, the whole point of professional sport is to feel like you're making a step in the right direction. Sure. And what that Black Ferns 15 game gave, this team in particular, was the confidence that they headed in the right direction. And, sometimes, we can get sort of split hairs about, what level of team was it. But at the end of the day, it was a team from New Zealand, which means, they know their way around a rugby field, and they lost fair and square. And it was a comprehensive, thrashing, playing the kind of game that they were hoping to play in the World Cup, which basically means the game works and, the skills of the players, are coming along, which is all you want. You want to feel like you're going forward all the time.
Yeah. Sim, thank you very much. It's 4:30 on Sunday. We're looking very forward to that. South Africa against Italy. It's a massive, massive game of rugby for the Bok women as they look to make the quarterfinals of a Rugby World Cup for the first time. There's also a host of Currie Cup rugby on this weekend. News 24 and Netfact Fair Twinnet will be bringing you all of that throughout the weekend. Thanks again to Stephen Null for joining us from the 16th floor. We appreciate your time, sir. For News 24's Inside Pass, this is Lloyd Bernard. Cheers.